All right, let's get started. Apologies for the repetition for those of you who joined us at the top of the hour. I'm John Gamble, VP of Marketing here at Pangea, and we're excited today to talk about AI applications, security concerns, and engineering trends we're seeing in the market. Pangea is virtually hosting this webinar on behalf of Ballistic Ventures, who is an investor in Pangea as part of their portfolio. So before we get started, I just wanted to turn the microphone over to David Hahn and Roger Thornton, co-founder and GP at Ballistic Ventures and in-house CISO. David, if you guys are on, we can give you the microphone.
Great. Thank you, John, and thanks, Pangea, for getting this organized. Hi, everybody. I'm David Hahn. I'm an operating partner with Ballistic Ventures. We're early stage cybersecurity only venture capital company. So what I'm going to do at this point is turn it over to Roger. He'll explain more about kind of why are we doing this? You know, what's the great idea that brought us all together here? And I'll provide a little more thank you in terms of the next slide. But Roger, I'll first turn it over to you, let you explain why we're doing this.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, John, for hosting us. Just a little background for everybody about Ballistic. Everyone in this call is engaged in cybersecurity, and it's a wonderful thing. We can do good and do well. The firm itself is mission focused. We really want to make an impact on security, and we think the best way to do that is by investing in companies that are working hard to innovate and build solutions that'll help the world be a safer place. And one of the key areas that we're focused on and dedicated to really goes back almost 20 some odd years for me when I got into security, and that was good friend of mine who's a co-founder of Ballistic, Ted Schlein, had asked me, you know, what are you doing when you guys are building computers to make them so impossible to protect? My career prior to that was all in the development of operating systems, development tools, and what have you. And I tell you, I was really hooked. And so this notion of building things to be more resilient and trying to make it so that the downstream areas of security can have an easier time is never. I think we're a long ways from really doing that well. But what I love is everybody, if you're on this call, you're engaged in that, you're interested in that, and I really think as a carve out area in security, it's the one that's the most near and dear to my heart. And so a little bit about this program and series that David's put together. He's going to explain more here in a second. But you know, one of the things we like to do at Ballistic is in the spirit of give to get. You know, we have in our portfolio companies and our advisors just some wonderful people who have phenomenal expertise in various areas of security. And so we created this community to be able to get together on a regular basis. We've got some phenomenal council of advisors that help us curate content. And we just want to bring really useful, timely information about application security, DevOps, DevSecOps, and learn together. And so that's the mission and intent here. And I will end this with just a giant thank you for everyone, and ask that you get involved, share your ideas and experiences. And the most importantly, thank you, David, for coming up with this. This was David's brainchild, so great work.
No problem, Roger. Again, it takes a village to put this all together. So want to thank all of our portfolio companies, Pangea being kind of the first one. So they get to really test this out and really make it work. And it's been, great. Again, all of our companies that are in this space, what we really wanted to do was bring together kind of, birds of a feather, so to say, focus on it. And so we're going to do these every month. We're going to skip December, just holidays. Everyone's busy. So we're going to come back in January, and I'll talk more about that at the end of this webinar. And then, as Roger mentioned, our special thanks to our very, very elite and special guests who really help us shape the content, moderate in terms of how we should do it. And we just happen to have Julie, who John will be introducing in a minute. But yeah, Juliana, David Weston, and Matthew, thank you all for the support and really the guidance you give us in terms of, are we really talking about things that are relevant, what's going on? So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to John, and let's start start the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Thank you, Roger. Before I introduce today's esteemed speakers, just a little bit of housekeeping. This is Zoom that we're on, of course, so you can ask questions at any point during the broadcast. We're going to hold questions until the end. We've got a Q&A session, but if you've got them, type them right in real time. We'll take a look and we'll try to get them answered at the end. And also, today's broadcast is going to be recorded too. So if you're not able to stay for the whole time or you want to share this with a peer afterwards, you'll get a copy of the recording broadcast after as well. So you can do that. With that, let's jump in. We've got two kind of amazing folks who've got just a wealth of experience in industry across the past decades. Saurabh Satish, Pangea's CTO and co-founder, he's got a multi-decade career of building just some really elite and high-scale cybersecurity products. He's a patent machine, hundreds of patents to his name. And most recently, prior to Pangea, was the co-founder of Phantom, a SOAR security orchestration automation response platform you might be familiar with that's acquired in 2018. So Saurabh, thrilled to have you here today, also to represent kind of the CTO perspective. Julie, equally as thrilled to have you here today to represent the CISO perspective. Julie also has a long and storied career in Silicon Valley across, kind of, I think, the full gamut of kind of startup to public company. I myself haven't yet gotten to the public company stage. I operate in cybersecurity startups, but Julie's kind of seen it all from 7-person startups to, publicly traded companies. And, one of her most recent prominent roles as an executive was CISO at Roblox, which if you're not familiar, you might not have children, but it's a popular platform and a popular gaming kind of environment. Yeah, she was, she's got accolades from places like SC Magazine. She's a frequent speaker, and you can find her on the road kind of giving kind of talks like these. So Julie, really thrilled to have you here today. I know you've worn many hats, DevSecOps as well. You're not just a CISO hat today, but excited to take a look at a bunch of data. We've got third-party data, we've got Pangea data, and have a conversation and hopefully engage the audience as well. I see some of the folks on, I know I've spoken to in the past, are definitely keen to dig in on this, and I'm curious to hear your perspectives as well. So Julie, Saurabh, thanks for joining us, and let's dive in. Quick agenda. We're going to go through these 4 topics. We're going to look at some data. I'm going to have a conversation with Saurabh and Julie, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Easy peasy. Let's go. First, let's talk about generally AI enterprise adoption. We're going to spend most of today's conversation looking specifically at AI-powered software or LLM-enabled applications and their architecture, their risks, et cetera. But let's start the aperture broader than that, because we all know with this generative AI boom, there's a lot going on that isn't just application specific. So let's kind of zoom out to start with and look at some data points here. The first data point comes from a Bain survey that was ran twice in the last 2 years, and most recently at the beginning of this year. And it's a really interesting survey. If you look here at the dark colored and the light colored, that represents in production versus in development kind of phase capability. And the left-hand side, right, is looking at internal productivity use cases of AI, generally speaking here. And the right side is really looking at product differentiation, or that AI-powered software, LLM-enabled application space that I was talking about. And I think there's a couple interesting things here, right? What's interesting to me is that the product differentiation there on the right is approaching 50% at the beginning of this year, which you have to imagine, if you were to extrapolate out, is probably over 50% now that we're almost 10 months later after this survey was run. Higher, right? Even than some of the internal productivity use cases. I think we hear a lot about, I'll raise my hand. I use ChatGPT in my daily job to summarize and do other cool things. We think a lot about the internal productivity use cases, but in fact, this survey is showing that just as much, if not more, activity is occurring where customers are looking to actually embed LLM and generative AI capability into software products and beyond. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I also thought it was interesting that among the internal productivity use cases, software code development is kind of one of the most common that Bain measured in this. And we see that a lot in our conversations with customers. So my first question for our esteemed panel, you guys talk to a lot of folks, you've got a lot of experience, you've got a big network. What are you seeing out there in terms of interesting conversations that come to mind, or interesting use cases, or places you've worked or are currently advising? Like, provide some color to kind of this data that we're looking at. Maybe Julie, we could start with you. Do you have any examples of key kind of use cases across the spectrum? And you're on mute, Julie, I think. Sorry.
Now, how was that?
You're good.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so I think that's a great intro to what we're starting to see across the enterprise. I think that obviously a lot of us have been able to have some anecdotal or ongoing help from ChatGPT in our regular jobs, whether it's summarizing things for for business or technical cases, or sometimes doing a little bit of generative research on getting the market, market opinions of certain things. I think that as most of us are still seeing like where we think the actual accuracy and quality level are on some of these things too. So I think that this is a good incremental work in progress. The most obvious thing, of course, is anything related to chatbots or customer service or things that like where you're going to be interacting with humans on iterative questions with known answers. I think we're seeing that's a very natural use case. I hear from product managers and project managers about like how they're using it in their work for both the research as well as summarizing things. So, to your point, John, about that. The other things that I think are noteworthy to me on the back end are, as a former infrastructure devotee, seeing the groundwork being laid for more efficient leveraging of LLMs, either in the public case or in the private case, and how we optimize and tune those things. I don't think that all of those things have been productized yet in terms of how the company is going to use it, but everyone sees where things are going. So we're laying down the tracks for like, hey, we know this is going to be a major game changer in terms of how we're using automation and intelligence. So let's get the infrastructure ready. So I'm seeing movements on that on both the startup and enterprise space. I think the other place that's important, and I think also speaks to marketecture versus the actual invention or innovation, is everyone right now feels some pressure to be on that AI train. And a mentor of mine who advises many startups and has an esteemed career in Silicon Valley was advising his startups, what's your AI strategy? And it wasn't so much that he was expecting them to have it on the hitting the ground running, but that they had to have a narrative around it and they had to have a story around it. And so I think that piece is important to observe and then see like underneath the hood, how much is actually happening on an invention level versus an innovation level. On some level, many companies have been doing some version of automation and machine learning for years. And some of that stuff is just incrementally moving towards its logical outcome. And that would be an innovative aspect of it. So those are what I see on the ground.
Awesome. And Saurabh, same question back to you. In your conversations over the last 100 days, is there anything that stands out from a customer or peer of yours where you've heard an application or a use case that really stood out?
Yeah, I mean, being in Silicon Valley, it's almost impossible to escape having a conversation where Gen AI doesn't come up in literally the second sentence or the third sentence. I mean, everybody is living and breathing generative AI these days. To the extent that one of my conversations, somebody said, these days, AI or die. So you're either on the bandwagon of AI or you kind of are dead. And look, I mean, all the way from developers taking advantage of AI-assisted code generation tools to applications they're either using or building and developing, it is very pervasive. I mean, we are seeing it being used and deployed at all levels because the productivity gains that people are seeing are just fantastic. And there are good users and not so secure users. And things like writing unit tests and functional tests on top of the code are, I would consider, some really good use cases of applying generative AI to development use cases. And then the first wave of application that we are seeing with regards to, help tools or support tools where data can be conversed with, leveraging generative AI applications. We are just seeing a massive explosion of these use cases being built or deployed within large enterprises.
Excellent. And one fun question, is there a tool you're using today in your job or have used in your job that you found helpful? I'll go first. We used Google Notebook the other week, which is one of these tools where you can feed it data and it spits out a 10-minute podcast of two talking heads. It's pretty good. It's almost, I would say, ready to publish publicly as a marketing piece of material. It's scary how good it is. Saurabh, any tool you're using or your team is using?
I mean, I think Zoom, AI assist is like awesome. I mean, it summarizes hours worth of conversation into something that can make perfect sense with like a 5-minute summary with the right, details about who said what. And I think it is awesome. And I've missed a meeting. I mean, I look at the Zoom summary and it's like, yeah, I got it all. And I went for the whole 1 hour meeting in like 5 minutes, and it is perfect.
+1. How about you, Julie? A favorite AI tool you've used in the past?
I've been playing around with a few of all of them, ChatGPT and Claude and also the let's see, the different ones. Just try and experiment on both routine business stuff as well as stuff that I might be doing for my daughter. And I would say that I like using Gemini for summarizing some version of the search results. What I have observed is that I don't know that I always trust its evaluation on outlier opinions or some of the quality depth. I think it's good at aggregating a whole bunch of stuff. I think in terms of discerning which one is the particular opinion that I think is noteworthy. I don't know if I trust it yet.
Same. All right, let's look at a couple more data points and then we'll close out this particular section. So, if you zoom out, right, we were just looking at 2024 data, right, from Bain. This comes from McKinsey, and this is a multi-year view, right, of the umbrella of AI. So not just generative AI, but machine learning models and everything under the umbrella of AI. And you can really see the spike, I think, that we're all feeling both in conversation and in business world too, where, as Julie mentioned, there's a lot of pressure to have like the AI strategy narrative internally. And I've certainly seen that in conversations with customers where they're creating AI security councils or have created them up to a year ago, whose job it really is to understand how to leverage this technology. But I think the left-hand side really just illustrates how much of a boost this generative AI technology has given to the overall umbrella of AI adoption across organizations, and just business function use is just up across the board, which is what the right-hand side shows. So to close it out on this particular section, 1 or 2 more questions for you, Julie and Saurabh. Hype versus reality. How are we at the top of the ride, or are we going to climb higher, do you think, in industry in terms of generative AI adoption and exploration, or have we reached the peak and we're on our way down? Julie, I'll start with you. What do you think?
Sure. I think that we are still climbing higher overall. I think that there's still going to be a lot of iterative improvements that when they come out, are we, being able to, effectively use the different techniques like RAG or some of the agentic AI. I think that some of these things still have some mileage to go in terms of both the hype and the reality. I do think that we are seeing the first iteration of the bubble sort of bursting in terms of maybe the crowd of AI startups that came up. Now, I do think that there's going to be multiple waves, and I think that on overall it will be trending up, but I think that we'll see some pullbacks here and there.
So Rob, same question for you. Higher, or have we hit the peak?
Oh, we have definitely not hit the peak. I mean, I think we are at a very early phases of AI. Again, as I said, the value proposition is tremendous. I mean, the productivity gains are tremendous. What we're seeing literally is the first wave of AI applications being built, where we are starting to unlock enterprise data and make it accessible and usable by consumers for variety of use cases. I mean, the most common one is around just helping teams be more expedient and more effective at responding to customer issues, support help kind of scenarios. And as we are kind of putting these applications in place, both for internal and external use, once it goes through the natural evolution of applications where you first deploy the version 1, and then it's about how can we make the experiences better, how can we take it to the next level, and how can we make it do more and better. And therein comes with a variety of architectures and approaches. You start off with everybody's kind of starting off with RAG or a fine-tuning kind of approaches, and then evolving into agentic and other approaches where they can get better and more mileage out of these applications. So we are definitely at the bottom of the hill, I would say, and there is a lot of room for growth and value that can be gathered in this domain.
Any trends you're seeing? If anyone wants to jump in, go for it.
I think in terms of like trends, I think there are, I would say, product companies are definitely trying to leverage to massively improve the user experience, both internal and external user experience, on top of the data that they have. And then the other trend that is that I was kind of little surprised about is how many ISVs are pivoting towards incorporating AI as part of their workforce so that they can be prepared for the onslaught of AI applications that are being built. So ISVs are definitely, in the phase of massively educating and empowering the workforce to be ready for building generative AI applications, while the product companies are trying to use these capabilities to improve the user experience.
I'll add one. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to say what I've observed in the startup ecosystem is I think that companies are looking, I think a lot of startup companies from dispersed geographic areas, let's say Europe and the East Coast, are looking towards Silicon Valley for some of the signaling around, what's where the innovation is going to get traction and what's going to get adoption. I think what they see is interest and engagement and design partnership from large enterprise, but I think that in terms of closing deals and being willing to jump into that pool, they're looking to Silicon Valley for what's going to be the next.
Agreed. One last question for you, Saurabh. We're not going to talk too much about code assistance AI tools. We're going to now switch the conversation really around AI powered software. But as a CTO, as a manager of engineers, what's your thought here about current impact versus potential of code assistance tooling?
I think again, AI assisted software development has massive productivity gains. Things like unit tests, documentation, functional tests. These are all the things which are the real, valid, practical use cases of Gen AI. And I'm seeing a lot of companies approving of code assist tools for specifically these reasons. Now, the next phase is obviously, can the code assist tools also help with production level quality code that can go into your production app? And that is something which comes with a lot of caution. And as long as the companies have the right, security guardrails with regards to secure pipelines and dependency checks and SAST and DAST capabilities, these companies are ripe to even take the code assist capabilities further into production. But again, as I said, productivity gains are massive. So this is a trend which we just have to embrace and enable by putting the proper security guardrails in place.
Excellent. Let's move on to the next topic. Let's take the aperture and focus on AI powered software, AI applications and development trends there. And then we'll dive into some security risks and concerns, and then finally close on mitigation strategies. So quickly, this slide here is kind of a distillation of hundreds of conversations that I think we've had as Pangea out there in the field over the last quarter or two, talking to customers of all types about what they're building. And if you think about AI, powered software or LLM applications, it's either a net new application, of course, or kind of retrofitting an existing piece of software with this capability. And then really, it's about combining internal IP, be that customer IP or corporate IP or employee IP, with these LLM models, because OpenAI might know all about the Social Security Administration, but they don't know my social security number. And it's that merging of context from enterprise data sets with these LLMs that can enrich and deliver personalized experiences. Architecturally, what we see at the bottom line is, we kind of hear these four things commonly across customers. There's other ways to architect AI-powered software, but we most commonly hear RAG, Retrieval-Augmented Generation, is kind of the most common. We'll look at some data on that front. Agentic framework, we hear a good bit about, and I'll ask the panelists about this in a few slides, so I'm kind of breezing through these. Fine-tuning existing LLMs, and then actually net new creating LLMs, right? So small language models or domain language specific models. not as common, but we do hear it. But those are kind of the common four architectures, software architectures that we see to basically merge the power of LLM capabilities with proprietary data sets to do things like, deliver an employee personalized chatbot with a knowledge of internal knowledge stores so employees can move faster and quicker. It's been a fascinating journey here at Pangea to participate in some of these conversations. And I'd love to hear from some of the folks on the line as well when we get to the Q&A, what you're building and what questions you might have or things you might want to share with the group. So let's look at some data. This comes again from Bain. I think the interesting thing here is the difference right between the dark shade and the light shade is DIY building, so self-coded, created in-house by engineers versus off the shelf, right? And if we look at the use cases spectrum, what we see on the left-hand side, right, is that most of the DIY activity is kind of weighted towards net new product creation or kind of IP that's directly material to the business unit and operation. And what we see on the right-hand side, right, where customers are tending to go with off-the-shelf applications versus building their own applications, are more generalized use cases, right? Like marketing, for example. I run marketing at Pangea, and the AI tools that are out there out of the box are really good for marketing use cases because I can just feed them pretty decently short prompts and get very good results back. But if you're trying to build a customer experience, there's just so much welding, right, of internal knowledge you need to connect. That's kind of a DIY application. And so, I think I've been surprised, I would say, by the last 100 days of conversations about just how many companies are building AI-powered applications right now, and the volume and the velocity and the innovation that's happening, is quite stunning. If we go to the next data point, so this comes from an internal survey Pangea ran amongst our kind of audience outside of Pangea about what they're building. And we asked them, what kind of describes your current snapshot state of the union in terms of AI software development. And you can see that nearly 2/3 of respondents have AI-powered apps in production right now, which tracks well to kind of the conversations we've had over the last quarter or two. And then, almost, a quarter, right, are piloting or an experimentation phase. So it really is a majority kind of activity that's happening across the board. I've seen small, startups, large publicly traded companies, and everywhere in between, really trying to harness this power live. So again, I think, it's not, there's a lot of hype out there, but there's a lot of action, and there's a lot of real, code hitting the ground and being deployed that leverages this technology. And in terms of the volume, right, of development too, from our survey last month, many applications. It's not just one application. It's not just a Skunksworks project. We spoke to one customer, I think it was last month or 2 months ago. They have a goal, I believe, to have over 500 of their applications to be LLM enabled by, I think, 2026. Over the next 12 months, essentially, they have an internal R&D goal to basically take hundreds of applications into this territory. So just a stunning volume, not just velocity of adoption. In terms of architectures, right? We talked a bit about architectures here, and I'll ask some questions of the panelists in a minute. Retrieval-Augmented Generation, RAG, is kind of leading the charge. It's the fastest path, I think, to merge internal context to LLM technology, which is why we're seeing it take off. But agentic is right behind it. We talked to a number of customers who are right now building agentic framework applications. We just met one last week in New York, actually. It was doing some interesting work. It's right behind. It seems to be what's coming next. And as I said, you can kind of see some of the data points here. It's not totally out there behavior to be experimenting at kind of the far end of sophistication of training custom models or even building. We do see that activity out there, and I suspect as tooling gets better over time, that capability will be democratized across all organizations, not just those that have great R&D, budgets and teams to go try to tackle these problems. So some questions for the panelists. Saurabh, what are you seeing and hearing from your engineering peers in terms of software product development and LLM enablement? Like, what kind of provide some color of what you're hearing and speaking to your peers about out there? I mean, what are they thinking about next? Like, where do they think this is headed?
Yeah, so I think your survey kind of hits the point very precisely. RAG architectures are like the easiest to comprehend, very easy to build around, and it also fits the traditional data science and thinking around having an ingestion pipeline where you kind of collect the data, you massage the data, you put it together, and you query the data in order to get the information that you're interested in. And RAG architecture just fits that traditional thinking and mentality really well. And so we are seeing almost everybody starting off with a RAG-based implementation, RAG architecture. I mean, yes, fine-tuning and other approaches are there, but RAG is the leader as of now. And everybody who has built a RAG-based application, of course, is then the next phase is like, how do I improve the quality of the application? And so fine-tuning and agentic frameworks are the other two candidates. And reality really is that the application that we're seeing evolve is a combination of these approaches. So it's not just one. It's like RAG is there. They're also fine-tuning the LLMs in order to get better quality. And they're also adding agents which will then be capable of executing, breaking down the question, executing a plan, and then retrieving the data from even a vector DB or the respective SaaS applications or wherever the data resides, and be able to take actions. So, the first wave of applications is just about RAG plus fine-tuning plus agentic, and then we do hear a subset of customers or of people that we have talked to, which are training their own LLMs. And as you said, this kind of little not that common or predominant in the set of folks that we have talked to. And once these applications are in production, agentic frameworks just basically take the applications to just the next horizon, right? Next level, where not only can you just use the data to get better answers, but you can actually execute on, you can take actions on the data, right? It's not just about getting better answers. It's about what can I do with the answers? Can I resolve an incident? Can I send an email? Can I generate a report? So agentic frameworks are also evolving, and agentic architectures are evolving with, let's start off with some basic set of actions that can be taken on basis of the answers that we can gather or information we can gather, all the way to, let's even attempt agents resolving an incident and closing an incident. I think, the innovation is happening very, very rapidly, and we are seeing evolution of these architectures happening very fast.
And Julie, a question for you, putting on your former CISO hat, but also your DevSecOps background. I think often security leaders and security teams have tension between engineering and security. What advice or strategies would you give to security professionals to try to kind of become more friendly and involved, given all the innovation and change that's happening from a technology perspective? Any tips or thinking here for CISOs and security teams?
Sure. I actually think new technology innovation is a fantastic sort of alignment opportunity in terms of bringing security teams a little bit more to the forefront. Most security teams either get branded as being, the office of no, or like overly risk and compliance based, even the ones that aren't really, just compared to the rest of the organization. And AI is interesting and exciting, and it's a chance to get the security team as well as the engineers on the development and CTO orgs, on the same page, pushing towards something new, and maybe also co-developing those guardrails and capabilities together. I can think of one or two companies I used to work at that some of the more social and forward-thinking members of the team have really proactively reached out to the AI teams to work with them on, hey, what cool new things are you all coming up with, and can we be in there with you as we start discussing, data governance strategies and capabilities, and also cool new things we can do in terms of security, defense, or offense. What we found actually is most teams that you work with, if you make them part of it and you find something cool and interesting, they will come to the table, because every engineer wants to have that moment of, I built that really cool thing that, made money for the company or saved us on this thing. And so, bringing people to the table on that is a really good opportunity.
Awesome. I agree. Yeah, I've seen some folks on the security side of the house that have managed to get closer to the engineering process here with this particular explosion of innovation. And yeah, I think it is possible. I think security doesn't always have to be no, and this is a great opportunity to be an enabler.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, let's go to the next topic on that note. AI application security risks. So there's a couple different frameworks out there. I'll go through these quickly. I would encourage you to check them out after the webinar if you haven't visited these or dug into these before. But there's a couple different risk frameworks out there that we're seeing customers reference. One of them is the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs. So that's kind of the 10 key risks or vulnerabilities or threats that can be introduced into these systems when you're building AI-powered software. A great, concise list, I would say, of kind of top concerns that map pretty well, I think, to kind of what we're hearing out there in the market. Pangea is actually a sponsor of this open source project, so I would encourage those of you who are interested in this space and work at organizations that can sponsor to consider sponsorship. It is an open source nonprofit foundation, but I think increasingly a reference point that we're hearing in terms of understanding risk and mitigating it around these applications. And it's the things that we kind of think of, like prompt injection is very hot, and we'll talk about that in a second, look at some data points. But some of the things that maybe less obvious, like excessive agency, right? Once we get into the world of agentic frameworks, the proliferation of capability kind of explodes on what these systems can do, and making sure that the access controls and permissions are in place, and that a tool or an agent rather doesn't have excessive permission or excessive agency to go do things is really, really important to lock down and to guide in the right way. We also hear about Atlas, matrix from MITRE. You're probably familiar with their enterprise, risk matrix, which is used broadly in like SOC operations. Atlas is the adversarial threat. Oh, I'm going to forget this. Adversarial threat landscape for artificial intelligence systems. Atlas, I got it. Is a permutation of their typical risk framework, specifically around artificial intelligence systems. So it's much broader, whereas OWASP is kind of focused on AI-powered software. This matrix encapsulates that, but also other risks, things like evading ML-based detection, right? ML detection heuristics for threat detection, right, are captured here. So it looks much more broadly, not just at application risk. It also looks across organizations' use of AI technology. But these are two very common risk frameworks. There's others that are out there. Customers themselves are kind of developing their own risk models I've seen in threat modeling. It's a fast-moving space, right? I think OWASP has updated this like approaching 10 times in the last year or year and a half. Like it's a very rapidly evolving space, so there's a lot to learn, and it can be tough to keep up. But these are two great frameworks, I think, for kind of understanding risk and managing it. So let's look at some data points. We went out last month and asked an audience outside Pangea about what they're building, but also what they're concerned about, right? You can see that kind of regulatory compliance and cybersecurity risk were kind of top of mind for them, but also engineering skill set limitations, scale and performance, and business value justification. I think to Julie's point earlier about having the AI story is really important, because while there's a lot of hype, if you can't show results within a quarter or two of shipping, an AI-enabled product, cost justification, business value justification comes into question. So making sure that you can tie this innovation back to actual capability and business value is really important. But cybersecurity, regulatory, and compliance issues kind of have bubbled to the top here in this survey we ran last month, which also maps to other data points that you see out there. This one comes from Menlo Ventures. Data privacy concerns was kind of number 2, right behind, again, business value justification. So it's very clear that kind of privacy and security concerns are at or near the top of most customers' list of risks or potential barriers to innovation and deployment of these applications. So I think getting ahead of them early, especially in the prototyping and design phase, is really important if you want to accelerate your time to market here. A few more data points that come from Pangea. We kind of asked the audience to kind of rank kind of their concerns. Please excuse the colors, but focus on the purple and the green, where you look at the very concerned and the extremely concerned, right? And you see that people are very concerned about kind of data access, data leakage, hallucination, right? Content and experience from an end user perspective, right? They don't want false, misleading, defamatory, or otherwise harmful content to be spit out of these models and potentially, lose a customer or get sued, for example. So hallucination and content is definitely top of mind. But really, if you kind of focus on the purple and the green, right, it's really about data kind of governance and data protection, right? Leakage, exfiltration, unauthorized access, and prompt injection as well, and privilege escalation there you see in the top left, right behind those concerns in our survey. So there's just a range of different things out there that you need to address, but I think clearly it's that merge of internal IP with LLMs, where how do I protect that data, right, is really what seems to be top of mind for these customers in this survey. Some questions back to the panelists. Julie, um, what are your thoughts here in terms of like measuring AI security risk? Have you seen people using MITRE or OWASP or other frameworks? If you put your CISO hat on, and you were at an organization building AI apps right now, how would you think about kind of mapping, measuring, and mitigating AI security risk here?
Sure. To your point, John, this is an early space in terms of quantifying and formalizing these things. But there are some really great foundational frameworks, as you've identified, with MITRE and OWASP, and I think those are excellent places to start and get people thinking about it. I think that one of the key things is that even though the technology is new, the vocabulary and some of it is going to be a deep dive for new pieces of it. Risk as a whole is a holistic and sort of classic discipline. So like if you're looking at it in those ways of, what are my inputs and outputs? How are they going to distort the model? Data exfiltration, those are classic issues that will just have a new shape, a new permutation. So I think those are good places to start. And right now, I would urge orgs to right now use the looseness and openness of this current period to be able to think expansively about how this maps to your own threat model. Because having these frameworks and the charts and the checklists are great and important. It gives people a starting place. But at the same time, because so much is happening in terms of new frameworks, new capabilities, what are different ways that our data are going to be mixed or poisoned and whatnot, to be able to retain a little bit of flexibility and thinking in terms of what are new and innovative ways that are going to get compromised. As you pointed out, OWASP is constantly trying to update that to reflect that. And keep that ear to the ground for lots of people in your organization that are really tuned into outlier issues, like the QA people, the people in facilities, the people who work on customer service, those things that'll kind of give you that canary in the coal mine moment.
Agreed. It is a moment to thought lead, as you said, like within your organization, because of this kind of constantly changing nature. And so I think there's going to be some folks inside organizations that will have a real effect organizationally across the world on how we think about this, because they're going to pioneer it at their own organization.
That's right.
It's an exciting time for security professionals. What would your top concerns be if you were, back at Roblox or a similar company, perhaps,
Sure.
building AI apps?
Yeah, I think that obviously the data governance and the data hygiene would be top of mind, because those are always things that you worry a lot about from a breach perspective. I would, of course, worry about hallucinations, and not just hallucinations, but over-reliance on some of those aggregate opinions that aren't necessarily what your organization needs, especially if you're trying to fuel innovation. I think one of the other things that I would worry about is missing swaths of, important insights, either in terms of attacks or invention, because we are so focused on AI and the cool new technology we have. And so I think that there's always a tendency to say like, hey, like, this is really exciting and new. I'm going to like laser focus on this. But, in the meantime, you have all the classic threats, and then also classic threats that are innovating or changing over time, right? Like the things that are going to kind of come in under your nose that are, just having that chance to evolve, right? What does it mean when more of your workforce will be relying on AI and other data-fed sources for their work? How does that feed into the rest of your work product at the company? How does that feed into employee morale? How does that feed into how the groups work with each other? So there might be some different facets of this that, the unpredictability is the one constant, right?
Agreed. So a closing question for you on this section. For engineering leaders, which or of the security concerns that were discussed prior or not discussed, do you think should be top of mind?
I think your survey and Julie's expert opinion kind of captured it all, but maybe I'll just reword and reiterate some of the top of the mind concerns for engineering leaders. I mean, most of the security risks are the usual application security risks, but in the context of GenAI applications, the five, maybe a way to reword this is like there are five very notable security concerns. The first one is around perimeter defense. What kind of prompts the users are entering into the application? Are they attempting things like, breaking the boundaries of the desired behavior of the application, aka prompt injections and jailbreaks, where they're abusing the application to do things that it was not intended to do. Then the second one would be around data shields. What kind of safeguards do I have in place with regards to protecting the users from accidentally disclosing PII or corporate secrets to these apps as they're interacting with these apps, and what kind of exposure they are subjected to? Like, are they being exposed to harmful or malicious artifacts, and what kind of exploits can happen during the interaction, with these generative AI applications, like malicious URLs or instructions being given back to the users that they can accidentally click and follow through. And the third one is going to be around attribution auditing. What are people doing with this application? What kind of questions they're asking? What kind of information they're getting access to? Getting just visibility, because lack of visibility is definitely concerning. Like CISOs that we've talked to, they just are not getting their they're not getting the level of visibility they would like to have with regard to use of these applications. And the fourth one is going to be around authentication and authorization. Of course, we have to make sure that strong authentication is in place as this corporate data is being now made accessible to users. So making sure that the right kind of people and identities are interacting with these applications, and and to follow that, are the users getting access to the authorized data? Because in the absence of generative AI applications, this data was locked in the respective cloud native applications or applications which had proper security controls from authentication authorization point of view. But as the data is being pulled from all of these applications and being given back to the users, are those security controls properly translated and adhered to in the whole process? And the last one is going to be, as the generative AI applications are evolving and agentic frameworks and tools are being utilized, are these agents and tools executing on behalf of the user with the right permissions, accessing the right kind of information, and retrieving the right kind of information back and using it for subsequent tool execution or responding back to the users? Those would be the kind of security concerns and risks that the engineering leader should be thinking of, be aware of, and addressing as they are deploying and building generative AI applications.
Great, thank you, Saurabh. And with that, we're on to our final section, risk mitigation strategies, I think, which Saurabh, you alluded to in your response and covered. So let's take a look at some data. This data comes again from Bain earlier in the year, and it measures readiness, self-reported readiness, right, organizationally. And I want to call your attention to the right-hand side, right, data security readiness, data security protocols and capabilities readiness. The spectrum, right, goes from reporting 1, least prepared, to 5, so it's a scale, through 5 to most prepared. I think there's a couple interesting things here. One is the darker shade red tech, right, versus non-tech self-reported readiness is on average higher, right? You see, tech, who in many cases is probably at the edge of this innovation, right, coming out of Silicon Valley in many cases, feeling more ready and more familiar with the technology, more ready to apply security policy and control to it. And I think the other thing too is, like, we still have a long way to go, because very few survey respondents, other than tech self-reported respondents, if we just look at non-tech, 20% call it, are feeling kind of at that 4 or 5 level of most prepared. A lot of people are sitting in the middle of sort of feeling like a little prepared, but not super prepared. And there's a substantial portion of people that are sitting in the kind of I'm not feeling prepared bucket, right, coming from the non-tech side of the self-reporting. So I think there's a ways to go, and that's why we're holding today's webinar, right? We're in many cases sharing what we've learned from talking to customers who are already dealing with these problems and grappling with these problems, and in some cases have solved some of these problems, in quarters past and shipped products. So I think there's just a lot more education we need to do as an organization and globally to make sure everybody can feel confident about data and security policy around AI-powered software. We asked in our survey last month kind of what are they doing about these kind of risks out there. You can see that access controls is kind of up and near the top. Saurabh was talking about that in his response earlier on the last section about kind of one of the things engineering should be aware of, which is that there's just proliferation of a spider web of decisions and access to data and tooling and systems that just like it explodes in these frameworks. It's not very one-to-one, it's one-to-many with very unbounded kind of systems. So it's really important to like build access control policy that will scale. Right? When you have an agent out there reaching out to 12 tools or hundreds of agents inside a single application doing that. So you can see a lot of activity around access control here. Logging as well, from an attribution, visibility, like, forensics perspective, it's really important to be logging system behavior, not just for performance, but also for security, right? To be able to go back in time and understand, well, what was the prompt that led to a prompt injection, successful prompt injection that evaded detection capabilities, et cetera. Data encryption, of course, over half of respondents report using that. Prompt injection, approaching half of survey respondents said that they have some form of prompt injection capability. I think this largely depends too on what kind of application you're building. We hear customers that are building internal employee-facing applications less concerned about this because, well, that would be a inside job, which certainly isn't impossible, and certainly we worry about insider threats in cybersecurity, but there's a lot more trust there, right? About employees aren't going to be abusing the system. There's already security policy and control inside our environment, so we're not as concerned about prompt injection versus customer or business-facing public applications where the internet, the public, or a wide swath of your customer base is going to be entering prompts, tends to be higher there. To summarize, kind of, and you heard some of this in Saurabh's response on the last section, across all the conversations we've had on this topic, if we were to distill it into kind of 5 buckets of concern we're hearing out there in the market, it would be these 5. And we could probably spend the better part of an hour just discussing these things here on this call, but just for time today, we won't. But I will walk through them briefly. And a recording will be made available, so you can share this with peers afterwards if you're interested. But we really hear kind of these 5 things commonly across the conversations we're having. Perimeter defense around prompt injection, right? It is a net new attack surface area in applications. Yes, you can put text into chatbots prior to AI and generative AI, but the nature of how LLMs work in a non-deterministic manner means that prompts are kind of this whole widely, not well understood, I would say, technically attack surface area, and people know that it can be abused. You can use it to jailbreak, to access things you shouldn't, et cetera. Data kind of protection in sort of a DLP style kind of approach, making sure, sensitive data isn't leaking out of the system, isn't being put into the system that you don't want, as well as harmful content, right? Malware being injected into the system or malware leaving the system in end users' responses would be a terrible outcome, obviously, in your software products. Visibility is kind of the third big one that we see customers looking at, trying to address, right? Really understanding the full chain of activity happening inside of these organizations, or inside of these applications, I should say, right? What was the prompt? What was the authentication event? What model version number was used? What, vectorized piece of data was pulled? From what source was that data pulled? What was the, cryptographic key that allowed them access to that? The full kind of picture. So you can go back in time quickly if there's a problem and understand exactly what happened and why and when and where. A lot of customers are struggling right now with that, we hear. Access controls, kind of number 4, as Saurabh mentioned, really big and important in this world of like proliferated data and tooling access. And then some customers, not many, but some customers are out there kind of leaning into the next phase of agentic and really starting to think about, how can we not only make sure that, agentic frameworks are secured because they're a bit more complex, and have a bit more risk introduced from the nature of their design, but how can we make them work on behalf of security, right? How can we take the power of agents, which have, sometimes read, sometimes write, and beyond permission to take action? How can we make them take action that serves the greater security good to actually reduce risk? And so you can imagine there's a bunch of different use cases there, but these are sort of what we're hearing in the market. We'd love to hear from you. If you think there's something missing from this list, or if there's something you're concerned about that's not on this list, we're always interested in learning more from our customers out there in the market about what they're doing. And lastly, we'll close out with a few questions for time. We've got 5 minutes left. Saurabh, what security controls do you think right now are being overlooked and should be given some more attention? And a question as well, if you think about network side controls versus app level controls, what's your kind of point of view there in terms of, is it either or do you need both, and why? So yeah, two-part question for you, Saurabh. Oh, you're on mute, Saurabh.
In the interest of time, I'm going to breeze through this and just repeat some things that we've already said. Everything starts with strong authentication and authorization, putting visibility in place, being able to log and audit what's going on within the application, making sure there are proper guardrails around sensitive data that is being fed into these applications, being used by these applications, and what kind of information is being exposed back to the user. And then lastly, making sure that no malicious artifacts are propagating and moving through your application. Things like malicious URLs, links, parameters that can be used by the tools, files that are being processed or served back to the users, making sure they're not malicious. Those would be the kind of effective security controls that can be put in place. Now, with regards to network versus app level security, look, if anything we have learned over the long history of security incidents and exploits is that security is a multi-layered defense approach, right? Everybody wins by putting a multitude of security controls in place. So both of them have like their own place where they excel. Some things are very effective at the network level, things like denial of service, intrusion attempts, API security, those kind of things. On the other hand, there are some things like deep auditing, getting visibility into what's going on within the application, things like proper authorization enforcements. These are the things that can be done extremely well and effectively from within the application. So I think they both have their own place, and they both can be applied to dramatically improve the security implication, the security posture of the application.
Thank you. And Julie, a last question for you. Do you think the average security team right now is prepared to mitigate these risks? And if not, what are some steps or things they could be doing to help bridge gaps with engineering and reduce, AI software security risk?
I think by definition, on average, just because usually it means that the teams are already tightly scheduled in terms of all the things they need to do and the workload, they're not necessarily in the best position to take on whole new areas of risk. But I think in that regard, it's not something that means that you don't have the right team or that you have to change everything that you're doing. I think that what it does require is changing the way you work somewhat in terms of bringing that into leaving some room for incorporating AI risks into all the things that you're doing. But I think also probably freeing up some time and resources, or hiring in a few more people to really deep dive on this issue and understand the landscape well. And it's going to feel very non-intuitive because we are always spun up on operational issues and security. But I think when you're dealing with a new landscape that's being deployed very quickly, you have to give yourself that room to be able to address that.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Saurabh. For time, I think we're going to close it there. I have a quick poll I just want to push out to the audience. We're interested in topics you'd love to hear for next upcoming sessions. Give me 1 second. And it has been deployed. So if you would just take a minute, please, on your screen to answer this question, it'll help inform us for upcoming topics. And on that note, Julie, thank you so much. Saurabh, thank you so much for joining us today. Roger, David, thank you for generating the series. We're proud to be part of the inaugural kind of topic and class here. And we look forward to more coming down the pipe. I believe next up, Armor Code will be presenting. And I think Karthik is on the line. Let me just get him speaking. So if he wants to talk a little bit about what is coming up next, give me 1 moment here. Karthik, allowed to talk. All right, Karthik, you should be live if you want to come off mute and just talk a little bit about the topic for the next session, which I believe will be in January.
Absolutely. Hopefully you can hear me, John.
Yep.
Appreciate the session. I actually learned and enjoyed. Fantastic. I think awesome session, and hopefully we can follow you guys. We'll see. So for January, our topic is going to be risk management as the world embraces AI. Not only AI, but also the threat landscape is changing and morphing. So managing security risks and managing a posture that is tolerable for the organizations. in 2025 and beyond. That's going to be our topic. So it's kind of primarily focused on risk management and how do you balance between threats and risk and the speed of development and deployment in the technology landscape.
Awesome. Look forward to it. David, any closing words?
No, thank you very much, John, Saurabh, Julie. You guys are pros. You should be on a talking circuit to go out on this. You guys did a great job, and hopefully the audience, the guests, all enjoyed it. Because John had said this will be recorded. We'll have ways to make sure that you are aware. And then, yeah, everybody who came on, you are automatically invited to the next one. We're going to skip December due to holidays. January, we'll announce a date very soon, and so Karthik at Armacode will lead that. And then I'll also kind of, at next meeting, we'll go ahead and share the results from the polling. We're out of time at this point, so we don't want to hold everybody up. But yeah, those will all help us lead to the following agenda. Again, we really want audience participation and letting you guys tell us what you want to hear and see. So at this point, we'll sign off. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks for
Rob.
organizing. Really enjoyed it.